I'm here with Sarath Sengupta, who's the head of Global Trade and Receivables Finance in India for HSBC, and Simon Constantinides, who's the regional head of Global Trade and Receivable Finance in Asia for HSBC. Sarath, I mean, we realize India is going to be a huge player in world trade flows in the coming years. How is the pattern going to change, though? Is it going to change away from the sort of traditional model where emerging markets exported to the US and Europe, and perhaps more to intra-regional trade?
There are two basic shifts that are happening. One is because of the growing middle class, the demand for better things, the demand for luxury goods, etc. That is going to be huge. Demand for engineering, precision engineering, and demand for quality goods is going to increase. The other big piece over the next 5 years is infrastructure growth in India. Our finance minister expects that the infrastructure deficit over the next 5 years is $1 trillion US. It's that big an opportunity, and that can never be financed by public financing. So that there will have to be a lot of private involvement in infrastructure development in India. We are already seeing Chinese companies sort of starting to play a big role in infrastructure development in India, and we expect that to grow even further. But that is a big opportunity.
Okay, and what about on the growing middle class side? I mean, is that also an opportunity, again, for suppliers from Asia and other parts of the emerging world to satisfy those demands?
Yes, the growing middle class is demanding a lot more today, as we've been speaking about it. I mean, recently we saw British companies in India looking at education. The British Museum was there talking about doing more business with India. So it's not restricted to just the traditional industries. It could be education, it could be sanitation, it could be road development, it could be luxury goods or consumer electronics. So there is a huge demand for that in India, and that demand is only set to grow further.
Okay, so Simon, I mean, what are the implications for that in a trade finance sense? Because I mean, if you're talking about things as contrasting as education and sanitation, can you still use the same trade finance instruments to actually fulfill their export?
In the services sector, not as much. But there are certain trade products such as performance bonds and guarantees to backstop a contract in case of a default on the contract. But in terms of infrastructure, a lot of the infrastructure, the materials might be imported, so there'll be a performance bond to make sure the contractor performs, but then there needs to be the actual supply and the purchase and sale of the actual machinery, the equipment, the raw materials. So that can certainly use traditional trade finance products as well. But the other thing I think we touch on is that there is a significant amount of open account trade going on with India. That might change a little bit with new counterparties coming into play. As Sarath mentioned earlier, very much driven open account trade is very much driven by people knowing who they're trading with. But I think there's a variety of products, a variety of opportunities that to satisfy the need for financing. It won't be the public sector. It will need foreign direct investment. It will need the banking sector to have the appetite to stand up and support this the growth as well. And I think we'll see that happening. The opportunities in India are absolutely staggering over the next 10 to 15 years. And we're actually very excited about it, and to be part of that as well with our strong franchise in India and in all the other markets that India is trading with.
So as we talked a little bit about the likely growth in India-China trade, but we know also that India is part of the BRIC formation, and there's been huge discussions about trading within the BRIC countries, and Brazil-China has been a very successful trade flow. I mean, do you see that there could be other trade flows within the BRIC grouping? Yes. Including India.
Yes, India-China corridor we've already spoken about. The other corridor that we've started to see now growing is the India-Latin America corridor. It's still quite small. China has been the more dominant partner in doing trade with Latin America. But India, Latin America, including Brazil, Mexico, is growing at a rapid pace. It's more than 25% growth rates in terms of trade with Latin America. So that bit is growing fast, but it is coming off a small base. But we do expect that to be an important corridor over the next 10 to 15 years as trade develops there. India-Africa is a big corridor, as Indian companies do bring value to the development that is starting to happen in Africa as well. There is because India's gone through this cycle, they do bring that expertise to Africa. Pharmaceuticals and generics is a big play in Africa as well, because Indian generics is affordable for the African population as well. So those are corridors which are going to emerge over the next 10 to 15 years.
Presumably this aspect of trade is helped by the fact that India has so many overseas resident populations that can help to facilitate trade. Is that right?
Well, clearly, I mean, a lot of this trade, I mean, Simon did mention this earlier, trade with the UAE, for example, is dominated by the emigrant Indians that reside there. Similarly, like Africa or other parts of the world, I mean, there is a huge amount of Indian population that lives across the world, and that does facilitate trade with those countries.
Okay.
I think another point, if I may, that I find very interesting about India is if you look at some of the larger companies that are Indian companies, they're still actually run by the first generation or the second generation of the promoter. So there's very much in these very large companies still an entrepreneurial spirit at the top. And that makes these companies more, maybe potentially more explorative than and inquisitive than maybe large multinationals that are not, don't have that entrepreneurial spirit. So I think Indian companies are very prone to not sitting at home as much as you might think, but to go out and look at opportunities and explore opportunities in new markets because of that entrepreneurial flair that still exists.
Okay, Sarath, I mean, this is all very positive stuff, but we live in very difficult economic times. So is India's trade going to remain resilient in the light of very sluggish growth, particularly in the West, but slowing growth in key emerging markets like China as well?
Brian, growth across the world or lack of it will definitely affect the Indian trade scenario. So India is not immune from it. EU is slowdown in the European Union, slowdown or lack of growth in the US, etc., does affect India. But what we have seen is from the period of 2008 till 2012, where the world sort of went through the financial crisis, India's trade with the world grew by circa 80%. So it has been resilient during that time. So I'm fairly optimistic that the growth will continue. In fact, in HSBC, we sort of predict over the next 10 years, India's trade CAGR to be in the range of 15 to 16%, which is quite good. So yes, there will be, the global slowdown will affect India, but it will still be quite resilient, and there will be a good growth in India's trade with the world.
Okay, thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.